I'm Ryan Brooke-Thomas.
Max Worrell. Oh, sorry.
We're the co-chairs of the New Practices Committee, which was established as a forum for new and evolving models of practice, architecture and design practice in the city. The committee was started in 2006 with the creation of the AIANY New York New Practices New York Jury Portfolio Competition, which has, since its inception, looked to highlight and promote promising and innovative new practice models operating specifically in New York City. And as the competition series has evolved, along with the community of practices that have been really actively participating in programming, dialogue, and other output over the years, it has also increasingly sought to establish a selection of practices who, together as a cohort, demonstrate diverse and complementary ways of working, thinking, and designing. And in the years in between cycles, we've also engaged in programming with lecture series, roundtables, shared discussions, site visits, and other events that help us focus as a group on both looking inside and outside of the field to better explore the multifaceted possibilities for architecture in New York. So tonight's the final of 3 events featuring the 6 winning practices of the 2025 competition cycle, which was themed around the call of voice. Tonight we've got BAAB and Mattaforma, who will be, is it BAAB or BAAB? BAAB. Okay, sorry. It came out, I was like, that doesn't sound right. Who will be presenting their work and sharing more about their practice, followed by a shared conversation with past and new NPNY winner Tal Schori of GRT Architects as moderator. So Max is going to introduce the 3 firms.
Yeah, so BAAB Architecture is a practice led by Ted BAAB. The firm brings together a vision of what architecture can do with the understanding of how buildings come together. This approach extends to and helps shape the studio's work to be functional, efficient, buildable, and durable, with a focus to make architecture easy to engage and easy to love. Mattaforma is a New York-based architecture practice led by Lindsay Wickstrom. The studio specializes in work that conceives of the built environment as an actionable medium towards a more equitable planet. They believe that shaping the next generation of buildings in our built environment requires an ethical underpinning with a new perspective towards resources. Tal Schori of GRT Architects. Tal is the co-founder and principal of GRT, along with Ruston, who I saw sneak in. The firm was awarded in 2020 with the New Practices Award. The hallmark of their practice is work that marries design aesthetics with technical excellence, often alongside or in dialogue with historical fabric. They are makers who experiment with materials and are hands-on during construction, often building their own prototypes and overseeing fabrication of specialty components. So a kind of natural to have Tal here to moderate this discussion. So with that, we'll welcome Ted.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk about 4 projects tonight. And these 4 projects are primarily around houses and housing, which is really my interest in domestic spaces as sites of habit and ritual and routine, but also as locations for fantasy and imagination as well. I'm particularly interested in thinking about form and typology as variables that let us explore how we can help, or how we can allow architecture to help us find new opportunities for living and for living together. So I'm gonna start with a very small project, which is a bathroom renovation. It's a kind of funny thing to present in this format, but I think it really embodies for me the way I think about certain types of design problems, which is to find some way to turn the problem upside down, or in this case, inside out. So the commonness of this brief, I think, is what resonates to me, and all of us architects encounter the problem of the bathroom all the time. This is one that is not really an exception. This is the bathroom as I found it, as it was given to me. But with the provocation from the client that above all, that it be a place that feels comfortable to grow older in as well, and that can feel safe. So that started really with the premise of how do we install grab bars and other features like that that don't take away from the feeling of the bathroom. So the more we started thinking about it and talking about that, I really started trying to think instead that maybe the grab bar should be the protagonist of the project. So the grab bar, disguised as a towel bar, wraps around the entire perimeter of the room. And instead of plumbing fixtures being something that take up all the wall space, they're clustered together in the middle as a kind of totem to everyday rituals. The space is totally barrier-free with a shower and a toilet and a sink, and accommodates many individuals who can use the bathroom at the same time. Perhaps your spouse is showering while you're brushing your teeth. And at the same time is a playful space. And let me see if I can successfully play the video. Is that true? Yeah. I was really looking for it not to feel like it's designed for getting older, right? So the towel bar, grab bar combo doesn't ever give away the fact that it's designed to be structural. The entire bathroom is wrapped in the same reflective tile that plays with light and movement as different people come and go from the room, and really allows the bathroom to feel like a kind of a sanctuary rather than something that is increasingly difficult to use over time. There we go. The second project I'm going to talk about is for a house in Long Island on a somewhat unusual site that is very long and spans between two very different worlds. On the right, the walkable pedestrian area of the town of Greenport, and on the left, the wetlands. So the project is sort of about spanning this difference between these two seemingly opposite ways of living in a vacation house. And the client importantly wanted to not feel like the house was separate from the town too. So it really was about sort of thinking about how bringing those two worlds together. So the plan is organized around a series of walls, and those walls subtly shift in angle to allow some of the spaces to open more towards the town and some of the spaces to open more towards the wetlands. So the bedrooms are on the north and south side of the house. And so as residents move north and south into the more shared areas of the house and into the bedrooms, they're offered a kind of oscillating experience of seeing different framed views out to the landscape. The roof that spans over these walls is curved to take on a variety of different scales and complements the varying scale of the plan with a varying scale and section as well. So it becomes a kind of vocabulary to modulate small intimate spaces and large collective spaces. This is also the project that there's a model of over there, so you can look at that after. The curving of the roof also allows the house to stretch out into the landscape and enclose some of the areas of the landscape to become extensions of the living areas that get folded into the house. Because of the orientation of these walls and these varying heights of the curved roof, despite the fact that the house has sort of one primary orientation, east-west, the house kind of has no real front to it. So as you're walking around the house, it always takes on a different profile. On the interior, the roof curves down to softly divide public areas or shared areas of the house without needing complete walls, while still creating kind of pockets of living areas. While bedrooms have the roof that curves down lower and creates a more intimate experience. in contrast to the more shared areas where the roof is able to lift up higher and frame much larger expanses out to the landscape. So coming back to the site, it really is a way of thinking of stitching together these two sides of the site. And one interesting way that that happens too is that the two sides of the site, two sides of the house look almost the same as each other too. So there's a way that you can leave the house from one side or the other and almost find yourself in a totally different world. It's a way of kind of mapping these two worlds onto each other. The next project is for a addition to a house in Cape Cod. This is a modernist, kind of strange modernist house. And the client came to me looking for a way to add a second floor on this house, which is at first a seemingly terrible idea because certainly the best thing about this house is its super eccentric roofscape, in part put together because of the strange intersection of two streets that gives this a triangular site. So it's the sort of collection of all of these different shed roofs that make this sort of amazing landscape on the roof. So the puzzle really became about how to stitch a series of volumes into the roofscape as opposed to putting something on top of it. So a series of 3 separate rooms, each at different elevations, offer something totally new to the existing house while also trying to find a way to make themselves totally a part of it at the same time too. So these volumes each find places to lock themselves in or to tie themselves into folds or corners or edges, finding opportunities to become collinear or parallel to existing parts of the house. So finding geometric ways to kind of like couple itself with the existing roof, sort of making it inseparable. The other way that that happens is through the plan. The existing plan of the first floor of the house was primarily 1 story. It had a single room on the 2nd floor that these 3 volumes were added onto. The existing plan has a sort of atypical or unusual use of 45 and 90 degrees because of those 2 streets that it's organized around. So trying to think about where and how to locate these 3 new rooms was about finding opportunities within this logic of the plan to tie in these new spaces. And again, it uses those various points of corners or edges that extend from the existing structure into the new one to kind of make these things seemingly inseparable from each other. But despite following the logic of the existing house and the existing plan, the 3 new spaces are totally different. Unlike every other space in the house, this is a string of 3 new rooms that are all 3-sided and that are all connected through their corners. So it becomes a kind of thread of spaces with a totally different logic of circulation. And by moving through their corners, it opens up the other 3 sides for expansive windows out to the landscape. One of the strange things about this house, too, was that it seems to have been designed only to view the sunset, which is strange because it happens for a very short period of time. So there's almost one side of the house that doesn't have any windows, even though it's in a very bucolic place. So one of the things that these volumes do that the house can't do is to bring back that panoramic experience. So you can see from the front the way that these volumes kind of climb over the existing roof line, and also that they're at each different elevations and allow us to kind of like live within that roofscape. On the water side of the house, the volumes kind of tuck themselves behind some of the existing rooms, while on the garden side, the new primary bedroom, as an effort to kind of copy the lower bedroom that was already existing in the house, the new bedroom actually doesn't fit in the house anymore. So it becomes an excuse to kind of cantilever the bedroom out over the landscape. It's a kind of bird's eye view to the garden below, and an opportunity to kind of frame some of these new types of spaces under and around the house. But in addition to trying to fit in, of course, the new parts add new types of form as well. So importantly, they add a curve that the house doesn't have, and it becomes these moments where you kind of discover places that the new and the old sometimes blend in together, and other times really become in kind of conversation. And this is one of those spaces that is created as a result of these coming together. It becomes a roof terrace, a way to actually be outside in this roofscape. This idea carries into the interior as well. So this is the view upon entering the house, where the plan allows for kind of bifurcation, one view out towards the water and the other into the more domestic wing of the house or side of the house. In some of the new volumes on the second floor, you can see the kind of stepping that happens between these volumes, but also the panoramic windows in each of these rooms that allow you not only to see out, but also to kind of see other parts of the house and kind of understand the surrealness of being in this kind of roofscape. There are moments between the existing and the new that get framed through the organization of the plan. So this is a moment in the existing space that actually frames a view around a curve and into the new series of rooms. And other moments where you kind of catch glimpses of other parts of the same structure. Here you're seeing an interior space, you're seeing the outside terrace, you're seeing the landscape, and then you're seeing the second part of the house in the background. So even though this becomes a kind of like a surreal combination of new and old elements, it kind of forms its own vernacular in the end. The last project I'm going to talk about is a multifamily project that deals with a very familiar puzzle of architecture for New Yorkers, which is the 25 by 100 site. The commonness of this problem, and the commonness of this problem in particular for multifamily housing, is not new. We can think back to the era of tenements. This is the Tenement House Commission report from 1895, which was already 130 years ago, struggling with this puzzle of how to solve the narrow site with the windows on the small sides. And on the left, the kind of the conundrum of the tenement with many windowless rooms, and then already at that time starting to brainstorm ways of thinking of the typology in different ways. This is, of course, turns into the barbell plan that we see all over the city still to this day. So in thinking about this project in 2025, this is a site that is in a neighborhood with many other similar size lots and many other similar size buildings. So this permits essentially a 4 or 5 story building on a 25 by 100 lot. And that is the formula of almost every other building in this whole neighborhood. And of course, the typical formula for a building like this is an apartment building with 1 or 2 units on each floor, with a dark middle of the plan and a core of circulation. So in thinking about this puzzle, we were interested in asking more typologically, what could we change that would rethink this problem? So we decided to split the site in half. And instead of one long site, it's 2 tiny towers, 25 by 24, with an outdoor space in the middle that becomes a kind of a hybrid between, let's say, a stair, a balcony, and a fire escape. That becomes a space for outdoor living as well. So that center stair stitches together the 2 sides of the site. The site is entered from the street and then circulated up through this stair in the middle of the project. So unlike the 1 unit per floor with 4 units, this also has 4 units, but they're 4 duplexes, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. And that means that for the same square footage, they have twice as much facade and twice as many windows. So it's a way of kind of like switching the priority of how to organize the space given the same the same constraints. On the ground floor, you enter under the first building and then walk up the center stair. The bottom two units are accessed from the ground floor. And then on the upper floors, the living areas are split between each of the floors of the duplexes. So there isn't one living floor and one bedroom floor, but there's living spaces that are spread between each of the floors, allowing for the kind of maximum diversity of spaces that are on multiple levels and that have access to outdoor spaces in the center area, and then also views out to the rear yard and to the street. The plan is also divided lengthwise with a subtle shift that allows for some variation to the orientation of the windows on the front and the back, which is, let's say, a kind of interpretation of the townhouse bay window that allows for a different orientation of windows to let you feel a little bit more expanse out towards the street or to your surroundings. So even just a subtle shift allows for different perspective to each of these different rooms that you find inside. The center space is a kind of collage of expanded stair landings that become living spaces, but also we've been kind of calling it a kind of jungle gym space because of the kind of dimension of it. There's structure all around you, and it becomes a kind of three-dimensional way of moving vertically through the site. Living spaces can extend out into these areas, and then as you move up higher into the building, also offer views out over some of the lower buildings around. On the interior of the units, all of the living spaces are 24 feet deep, so there's always a kind of window in close proximity to each part of the plan to both the interior and also to the garden or the street. And offers a kind of variety of different proximities of living spaces to either that shared space in the center or this kind of panorama out to the view of the street or to the rear yard. So I want to end just with this image to come back to this idea that this is, of course, a very common site and a very common problem. It allows us to start to think of the way that even a small site or a small problem, much like the bathroom, can also be a kind of question of typology and a question of thinking about other ways of solving the problems that we're familiar with all the time, but with thinking of shifting some of the variables in the process. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks, Ted. Nice to see everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and thanks to the Center for Architecture for hosting. I'm Lindsay Wickstrom, the founding principal of Mattaforma. We're really honored to have this award and to be sharing our work with you tonight. And thanks to Max and Ryan for the introduction. So Mattaforma has a few projects that I wanted to share with you. One is particularly highlighted in the exhibition, which I'll talk to towards the end of the presentation here, but this is just to give a nice snapshot of our ethos and our work. And so I'll start here at the nursery at Public Records. Most of you are probably here in the city, based probably in Brooklyn, so hopefully you've been to Public Records. If not, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing campus of different ways to experience sound and food, and we're obsessed with them, and we were really grateful to contribute our design for the nursery, which is their outdoor event space. Our work with them was in collaboration with Cactus Store, which is a landscape architect group, and this is their second space in New York City, and so it's a really special opportunity to work with them too. The concept for this space was to use what was already there, which were abandoned shipping containers. So we oriented them towards this C-shaped space, which became the winter garden for all of their tropical plants that they have spread out all over their campus. And so during the winter, they live in there, and so really our first client was that collection of plants. So we interviewed the plants, we understood what their needs were. It's a passively heated space, it has the solar angle of incidence, but then the space started to become actually really fun to be in and imagine parties in, and so it grew into what is now a series of events at the nursery every Sunday where we kind of join and have the spiritual experience, look and aim ourselves towards the altar of the DJ. And all of the wood structures were kind of meant to allow this to happen without any kind of fuss. So the structure design is all laminated veneer lumber, sourced from Weyerhaeuser. And so as you'll see as I keep going, I'm really obsessed with sourcing wood in particular. I research it. I think a lot about what it means to purchase wood from a particular manufacturer and grower. And in this case, we learned a lot about Weyerhaeuser. They're one of the first companies to be regenerative in their practices. They're also the biggest lumber company in the country. And they only grow and ship regionally, which was really interesting to find out. So they're available at your local hardware store, and if they grow and ship from West Virginia, you're kind of in a really good place. So they provided all the wood for the on-site made trusses. That was another special story of this project. All of this was custom from off-the-shelf lumber, and the contractor couldn't believe that it went up so fast. When we went to do the site visit, when the truss went up, there was like a tear in their eye because they also didn't really need the drawings to understand what was needed to be built. So it was communicated visually and simply with off-the-shelf ideas and mending plates and connections in a way that could just be accessible and simple and still have a really amazing effect. We love this black pine too that was introduced to the site by Cactus, and they, the conversation there, we learned so much about what is native and what is not native to New York State, and we started to build our understanding and research around questioning that idea. So in this case, black Japanese pine is not native to New York State landscapes historically, but we started to make the argument with them and with the team at Public Records that this tree is native to parties. It's like really good at being kind of bumped around, and like accidentally cigarettes go out on its roots, and maybe like a dog comes by, who knows, but it's really durable. It's meant to be high up on mountains where the wind is just blasting it all day, and so it's actually really good at being here at Public Records. And so we started to think about nativeness and not nativeness in a different way, and how it connects to a kind of mini ecosystem that is the nursery. And so all in all, highly recommend their nursery series is going on right now. They have all sorts of community events here. There was one that was posted recently about a wattle and daub workshop that they hosted where just like mud was everywhere. And it was such a dream to see that kind of life happening in the space, and to have, you know, contributed these really simple structures to host that kind of community event. This passion and interest in sourcing and ethics and questioning how this relates and emboldens architecture started a long, long time ago when I was a student. So back in, I won't say the year, back in the day when I was at GSAP with my fellow cohort that are here today. I worked with Mabel Wilson and Kadambari Baxi on Who Builds Your Architecture, which is a nonprofit organization. We together published the Critical Field Guide. And this was one of my first contributions to their research, which was a map of material flows globally, which shows that your architectural drawings, the sourcing that you do, activates these landscapes far from your hand, far from your computer. When you just type in timber, mass timber, cross-laminated timber, it ignites all of these machines somewhere, all of these protocols for planting. And that just got me so excited about it. Just felt like our work as architects was so important, and that we were agents of change, even in those moments where we're writing a spec. And so we did a number of exhibitions. I designed this exhibition with them at Boston Architectural Gallery. And so that launched also this commission for 3 material stories, which was a series of drawings, originally in the Embodied Energy and Design book by David Benjamin. But then they were hosted at the Triennial in Milan and brought in by Paolo Antonelli, and so it became a kind of jumping off point for my practice. So now I'm going to try to do the same thing. Okay. Three Material Stories is a hand drawing of what are equirectangular or 6-point perspective drawings. And the idea was that you could unroll the whole supply chain of materials onto one piece of paper and print it out on a table and redline it as a group and really have a say in the way that materials change the world, move across the world. And so they became these spaces that live on a single 2D drawing. PowerPoint slideshow. Nope. Yes. And with that contribution, there were 3 large prints and a series of hand drawings, so I thought it would be really interesting, and I guess still is really interesting to me, especially in the context of AI and AI-generated images, a hand-drawn virtual reality series of spaces. So I taught myself how to do 6-point perspectives as sketches, and then would put them in this world and redline them from the inside. And so this idea of thinking about how drawings and iteration and material flows, those all early on in the formation of Mattaforma. So one of our first hospitality projects that was completed is Parkview Mountain House. And one of the earliest drawings that we thought about was the beginning of the material flow right from the site. So we started at the top of the drawing and then kind of worked our way down as the project continued and became formalized. This is a site in Park City. It's called Summit Park. It's a forest. So we were designing a building for the forest, and we had 2 really strong goals. Number 1, any trees that have to be taken down because of the construction of the building have to be used in the building somehow. And number 2, have the tiniest footprint you can possibly make. So that helped us generate what we were calling a mini tower. It's a 3-story short-term rental. And these 3 70-foot tall Doug firs were taken down and sawyered at a local place nearby, and we're waiting for them to dry, because when you dry wood outside, it's free, turns out. You have to pay a kiln to heat them up to dry. So we wait, and when they're dry, we'll make them into a table or a piece of wood. This is actually for skiing, so it probably will host a bunch of ski poles and skis at the end of the day. The wood was an amazing kind of experience to see those trees come down and to be milled and thought about, but the timing was an interesting consequence. So we thought originally, we could have them as a finish in the space, but when you think about the energy it takes to heat up wood and the time it takes, it didn't match up. So we wait. The retaining wall actually is now an erosion, preventer of the site, and hopefully will last longer than the wood structure. You've seen those photos of chimneys out in the woods that have lasted longer than the home, and that's kind of what I imagine here. We turned all of the views and all of the spaces of the interior towards the hillside to really reach out to these amazing trunks that are lodged in this 30-degree hillside that are leaning towards the house. And so we thought that was really interesting and had this precarity that was beautiful, as opposed to kind of looking out onto the more typical street. So like I mentioned, my practice, Mattaforma, is rooted in thinking about architecture as a form of advocacy and taking our day-to-day work, like really the work of design and form, of course, but also all of the paperwork, the spreadsheets, the emails, and thinking of those as also as advocacy. So when I wrote this book called Designing the Forest and Other Mass Timber Futures, it was published in 2023, it was meant to be kind of a follow-up to the critical field guide from Who Builds Your Architecture, but for mass timber. So folks that are interested in all ages, especially students, could read that and get a sense of what does it mean to design with timber and how might I have a say in this space, and also what came before. There's this amazing history of forest cultivation that we so easily forget. Before oil, wood was like oil, and so the forest designs were things to be fought over, and it was really important for the survival of any civilization that the forest be designed to support it. So that book has been foundational for the practice I've done a lot of speaking engagements on that research and sharing that at all sorts of venues, not only at universities, but trade shows. And specifically, my favorite was like a lumber factory design trade show. So they really resonated with this idea of designing the forest and the sawmill to be in sync. So one fun fact, understanding the maturity of a particular species has to do with understanding the size of your saw blade. And so if you can change the saw blade and change the whole building around that saw blade, you can actually impact the resilience of a forest. So these folks are like working on that issue, and I was so happy to be in that space and hear from them. And then, you know, the advocacy expands to other commissions, like MoMA commissioned me to do 13 episodes of Material Worlds, which I, you know, highly recommend you check out. I gathered 50 plus folks to speak on their expertise of different types of materials. This is season 2. Season 1 had mass timber as its kickoff, and then season 2 had some great folks. We talked about the future of water, the future of silica, which is the physical material of the internet, the material of photosynthetics, so like hemp and different things that you can grow, or just given conditions, doing nothing. What is that? So those talks are really, I hope, you know, providing this kind of foundation or just some feedback to folks that are working on this topic. And have done talks. This is Prada's Possible Conversations or the International Mass Timber show. So this kind of advocacy and writing and research, it's all, you know, talk, it's all words and paper, and so I really wanted to get my hands dirty, and one of the big, amazing sponsors in the mass timber space is the Softwood Lumber Board. So I would highly recommend also that you check out my op-ed on the Softwood Lumber Board and the importance of their existence in this space. They sponsored this incredible workshop. The result is called Tilt Pavilion, but the process is so much more interesting than just the final object. They invited me to join a group of young tenured faculty that come from architecture and engineering. I'm not tenured, I am a floating person, so they invited these tenured folks who have never done mass timber or don't know anything about it. They only applied for this as an opportunity to learn, and their schools maybe put their name up, so they really didn't know what they were getting into. And they brought me, along with the educators at the Tallwood Design Institute in Eugene, Oregon, to kind of teach and inspire this group of 20 plus faculty members from across the country from all sorts of universities to bring it back to their university. And it was a kind of immersive 2-day experience where we went from making models, especially with folks that maybe don't make models every day, to building it by the end. And so we worked with structural engineers, we understood, you know, each phase, and then it finally became, you know, it was fabricated on site in the Design Institute, and so if you know of a home for it, we're looking for you know, phase 2 for the Tilt Pavilion. It can be flat packed. It's super heavy. That's all I'll say. So it's like 12 feet tall, 8 by 8 footprint, 8 by 6 footprint. The design idea was amazing too. We took rectangular panels. They were donated by Vaughan Lumber, which is a really amazing 5th generation lumber owner out in the Pacific Northwest using Doug fir. So these are Doug fir cross-laminated 3-ply panels, and they donated 3 rectangular panels, and the design angles are coming from an effort to have no waste. So it's like I should probably add a drawing of, you know, the cut sheet. The angles create, you know, that little triangular bench is the corner of the angled panel, and so there are no leftover pieces. And then we used all these dry connections, and it was amazing too, empowering that all of us who had worked on the model were there just screwing it in and learning how to build the pieces. And I think that idea is just so inviting, especially as someone who's not in the trades and who, as a woman who's typically not in the trades, I would say a lot of the faculty never saw themselves as having constructed anything or being hands-on, and how easy it was. I think it was personally inspiring to a lot of those folks. So hopefully more from Softwood Lumber Board. This kind of work extends to our domestic work or residential work. We had just finished Rugby Duplex, which is a renovation out in Brooklyn, and one of the features of this gut reno was the cutting and the sourcing and cutting and milling and sanding of a reclaimed bowling alley. And the reason that we wanted a reclaimed bowling alley is because right in that location where the ball drops, it's a combination of maple and pine, and maple has this density that really resists the ball dropping. And that was going to be perfect, I think, for this area where the owner wanted to host and chop and have it not be a precious surface, but we also didn't want it to just get destroyed. So it has this durability baked into it. And so we located this slab with Sawkill, and then we cut it right at the tangent where the ball, would have been dropped. And so that process, it sounds so easy, and I'm so happy to deliver you this simple story, but it was so complicated. It was so complicated to figure out who's going to go pick up the slab. Just it's not like a typical service, and who's going to cut it and then bring it here, and who's going to sand it? Is it the builder? Is it the mill worker? Is it Sawkill? Even I got texts saying, can you just go pick it up? And I think that, and I said, no, it's like too heavy. We need some infrastructure. And I think a lot of folks here will understand, that effort when you're trying to do something new in architecture. It's such brute force at times. And so, I think when I get that feeling, I know, we're really pushing things. So one of our main focuses right now as Rancho Almos Almos, and this effort is a biodynamic farm based in the middle of Arizona near Sedona in the high desert. And they are super interested. It's around 131 acres of a site. They are focused on creating a farm-to-table hospitality experience that's a place where you might stay overnight, where you engage with the landscape, but also attend an event that's communal or a wedding or something like this. So we're working with them on the design of not only the whole site and its flows of people and tractors and cars and water and sunlight and vegetation and cultivated agave, but we're also designing buildings and working on post and beam details and fighting for no steel beams, which we just got an email about right before this meeting. Take that one beam out. Let's workshop that. So we're, every single piece is meant to be super utilitarian and meant to last, but also meant to be, accessible and accessible for the owner, economically. So there's, as there's so many different parameters to balance, but the main goal of Rancho Almos Almos is to, bring people closer to the land and better understanding of the abundance that the high desert has to offer. So they're cultivating a lot of foods that were historically cultivated here and bringing back an endangered agave species that was found on the site and identified by the Botanical Garden in Phoenix as being almost extinct. So they're really participating in this really amazing story of ecological cycles. We're also currently pushing forward a project in Chattanooga with our client Monospace. It's a beautiful idea about occupying an existing slab with a dinner series at first and then growing it into a music venue, restaurant, bar. We just finished the special events permit, so hopefully we'll get that back with a big yes, good, build it. Here's the model that Mara's working on right now in our office, and I think it's meant to be this phase one activation of an existing stoveworks factory under an existing steel structure where the rail would come in and deliver the materials for the stoves to be smelted. So it's this transition from steel to wood structures, and we're also excited to kind of echo the truss forms and the really like the thinness and essential character of what was a very productive building. And so phase two, after this is phase one, phase two is in this building here and would be a full-on music venue. So thank you so much to everyone here, and I wanted to also make a quick note. When we were at WBYA, at Who Builds Your Architecture, we were constantly asking architects to create a credits list. So like at the end of a movie where you see every single person that touched a project, like Mara's model, like Lindsay's email today. I think there's just so many people and so many hands and minds involved in architecture. So this is, a big shout out to the whole team and everyone that's ever touched our work. There's just been so many people, and I tried to make a big list on the wall, but we ran out of letters. So if your name isn't up there, it's in my heart. And so thank you so much for being here tonight.
So, thank you both, Ted and Lindsay. Both your presentations were really inspiring and kind of getting to know your work a little bit through this process of preparing for this conversation. I was really kind of impressed by the breadth and the sort of ethics of your work and the output of it, and both of your dedication to building, in addition to the research and the sort of thought and rigor that goes into the work. And so I put together a few questions that I think touch on topics that you both are really passionate about. And I think your kind of ending to your presentation about the role of the credit role for every project is kind of a good segue into one of my questions, because I do think this notion of labor, both in architecture firms, but also beyond in terms of who builds your architecture, at the sort of scale of the global scale of like the industry to create materials, but also on the local scale of individual projects is a really interesting one to me, and obviously to both of you. I think in reading, I read through some of your entry text to this competition, and there's a few things that struck me. There was, I think, Ted, you said, you were really committed to this notion of builders as part of the vision, and I think Lindsay, similarly, you're very much, you even mentioned in the description of one of your projects, kind of almost not needing drawings, that there is this sort of collaborative process that occurs. And I was curious to hear you both talk about that notion of labor in your projects, both inside the office, outside the office, and in terms of realizing your projects, how you think about that and how you kind of have been surprised in inspiring ways in your projects to harness those relationships.
Thanks, Tal. Yeah, I mean, labor is kind of, it ebbs and flows too. I think my ability to track how we're making a difference when it comes to labor at all scales is a labor for me too. So I'm most inspired by, I think really locally, our team here, Mara and Lindsay, are in the office, on the day to day, and I think understanding their experience means a lot to me. Then scaling up, let's say on the ranch, when we do site visits, I think a lot about all the folks that are running around taking care of the animals. Like what is their understanding of the project? What is their understanding of how their life will change? And so we take time to engage that community. And then also on the ranch, we engaged an even larger community, and that included builders and potential contractors and craftspeople who might do Adobe on the site or use the site for experiments, and trying to find folks that might contribute their knowledge in a way where they could build an Adobe wall and teach the folks on the site, and also have this amazing craft where it's not sourcing something that's going to be more expensive because it's handcrafted. But all of that labor to organize those things, I'm finding is more my job than ever before. And I'm trying to embrace it. And so, but it's a real skill, like understanding, who should we collaborate with and invite to host this kind of event called Build the Adobe Wall? And how can we organize the community around this kind of rezoning project and talk about jobs and economy in a way that is really interesting to them or helpful to them and doesn't feel like a NIMBY problem. So I think everyone's really thinking about labor. It's kind of on everyone's mind, and try to do a couple of things that have a multiplier impact. I guess that might be our main focus right now.
That's interesting. I mean, I have a maybe a different side of the problem I've thought or worked more on. I'm sure I'm not in the minority of architects in the audience who have found that contractors just don't look at your drawings. We do all this work, and then it's just like it doesn't really matter what you worked out in a detail or something. It's like it just doesn't occur to them to look at anything. And I think that represents an incredible divergence in expertise, but also in language between how we're designing and making decisions about things and how things actually get realized. I often am using words like RCP that an electrician had never heard of before, right? He kept asking where the lighting plan was. There is like a comical gulf between how we imagine we're conveying information to the construction site, and then we're surprised that we're frustrated that things don't look like we want them to. So I think that there's also a really important role to rethink what the drawing is and what the means of conveying our intent and our ambition is as well, right? It's not just like if we come up with a good idea that we get mad that someone can't do it. We need someone else to help us figure out what's the right way to do it too. For the Cape Cod project, there would have been no way that they would be able to read the drawings to fit these things into this. I mean, like impossible. At some point, I mailed them a model. And I was they stopped looking at the drawings. But on the model, they're like, oh, this part aligns here. Or I see you want this to be on this side. It was so easy, actually. So I think that there's a strange way that we kind of imagine that professionalism is about leaning into this skill that is strangely separating us from our ability to do a lot of the things we're trying to do. And that's one of just many examples, but there is no project that doesn't involve, as you've said, like meeting the person, finding out the thing you drew is impossible, like getting other ideas of how to do it, and in the process, often finding many new values of what's important to the project or ways of making it ambitious in different ways. So I think that like design ambition and construction ambition are totally inseparable from each other. And in fact, the only thing really keeping them apart are typically our instruments of service.
Yeah, I think that's kind of spot on in terms of my experience as well, and just understanding that you kind of need to understand who you're collaborating with and what their capabilities are, and vice versa, because we're limited in terms of our abilities too, in terms of communicating those things. One of the other things I kind of appreciated in both of your presentations and kind of the way you talk about your work is just the notion of storytelling to some degree, and I think, Lindsay, you do it, a lot with materials, and Ted, you do it with kind of telling stories or focusing on historic forms too, and this notion that through your work and through your interventions or through your embrace of materials or vernacular, you kind of are trying to tell a story and use narrative to express and communicate some of the things you care about. And I was hoping you could kind of talk a little bit about those things, and also, you know, the pitfalls of that. I mean, I know you're, Lindsay, have spoken about like the pitfalls of greenwashing, and I don't think your work does that at all, but you know, that is kind of like a pat narrative that often happens around work, and so I'm curious to hear both of you speak a little bit about that.
I think narrative is the kind of glue of a project that, to the point we were talking about questions of labor, there's many other aspects of, or there are many other audiences of a project. One of them, obviously, is a builder, right? Because they have to understand what you're trying to do. A client has to understand what you're trying to do. You have to understand what you're trying to do. I think narrative is like an important tool to kind of organize all of those things into some common goals. And also to kind of, I think it's very important for the client to be able to have a way of thinking through the priorities of a project that isn't taste. Because I think very often we underestimate the difficulty of evaluating something that an architect is showing you. So I think narrative is, an extremely important facilitator to help translate the things that we imagine are good ideas into a way that a client or a builder can relate to them and to make them possible. So I think that for me, you know, I kind of bristle a little bit at the idea that a narrative is just bullshit too. I think it really is kind of world making in a way that is required to kind of build the constituency that makes a project happen, whether or not it's small or big. I mean, even like this bathroom thing, like you have to tell someone that it's not going to be a bad idea, right? And that it's going to not be annoying later, and that it's not going to be hard to clean, and all of these things. They all have to be kind of part of the story of why it looks that way. That also makes it exciting and something you want to be a part of. And so I think it's like it's maybe one of the main parts of our job, I think.
Yeah, well said. I agree. And maybe that's, you know, the instrument of service that can stay. Yeah. I mean, two thoughts. I completely agree with this glue, and to build on what you're saying, we're going through, for the ranch, we're going through a lot of VE phases right now. There's a whole host of buildings on the site, and each one is undergoing VE at different times, and there, you know, it's unclear, you know, how much each building is related to one another or how much value it's going to put on the table, pro forma. Anyways, so when we're thinking about whether to do, say, an exposed wood rafter ceiling, then the narrative comes into play immediately. Is this a barn or is it like a lodge? And we're trying to use words to label the feeling or the experience. And if we have been really disciplined in saying this is a barn, this is a barn. And even on our team, it's hard for me. Like, okay, no, this is a barn. This is a barn. You know, does a barn have this more expensive ceiling? And so I think it's challenging for everybody, but it's a way to get everyone to into one mindset, I guess. And maybe then the decision is that you have to change the phrasing. So we've also renamed a lot of sites, places on the site. Is this a meditation space? No. Is it a multi-purpose space? No. Is it, you know, what is this space? I think it's really interesting to work with clients like that. Monospace is the same, where program and typology are being questioned. Everything is a kind of hyphenate now, and so we're having to really make those decisions, and the words that we use and the language that we write down on the program diagram has to be really clear so that we're measuring up to that type or that title in a way, or that they find each other in the middle. But yeah, I think it's a pretty important part of our job. I guess the second thing I was going to say about narrative is that oscillating between like writing and practice has helped me, first of all, enjoy being an architect, because the book forced me to do a literature review like I've never done. I mean, reading just every book you can, consuming every book possible about timber and forests. And that arduous process was like a PhD. It felt like going to school again, and it was it kind of rooted a lot of the work, the everyday work. And so I'd love to do that again and go between that kind of effort and back to practice, so that there's this overarching goal. Like, here's the 20-year shot. We have this, we know that it's coming from this space in history and that it's going to this place. So all those emails and diagrams are in that, Gantt chart, from the past to the future. I can locate them in this story. And that makes me feel really proud. And it makes me feel like Mattaforma is this slice of a bigger picture.
That's great. I think, the way you described it, Ted, just kind of taking control of the conversation and taking control of the narrative and not making things based on taste, especially in, some of these smaller projects that, as young firms we start out with. It's so critical to understand how to use language to bring people on board and to use it as like a sort of leverage to get people to see things the way, not only that you want to see them, but like to communicate your values and have people, engage with them. So I think that's really great. One of the things that I also think both of you kind of have come up against in your practices in different ways as well, because I think there's a lot of points of contact between your practices, but they're also very disparate in many ways, is the ways you have engaged with code, legislation, zoning. I think, in the case of both of your practices, I've looked towards what you've done as a resource. I mean, your essay about zoning that you contributed to the So Ill book, and then I think when we were early on working on a project that might have been CLT, I kind of had conversations with you, and unfortunately we did not prevail on that project, but I'm curious to hear about both of your engagement with those sorts of bodies, entities, authorities having jurisdiction, just in terms of how you practice.
I mean, I am so inspired by your work, Ted, and that you also take this on. I think it's similar to a commitment to construction, is a commitment to doing all of that work of permitting, and I think it's really interesting to work on that project. Maybe not in New York City, like elsewhere for us. I mean, we're permitting a lot of stuff elsewhere, so I'll apply that to our work there. In these locations in Arizona and Chattanooga, say, for example, the county and the city, they're a phone call away, and you're, like you were saying about connecting directly with that person, calling them up, our rep Stephanie out in Yavapai County, hey, how's it going? Okay, we had this one question, and that kind of relationship, that experience on the day-to-day basis is so enjoyable. It does feel like building consensus is our job, and communicating the value of architecture and bringing those folks on board and having everyone move along at the same pace so no one's shocked like when something happens. It feels like that's at least what we're doing right now. We're doing a big rezoning effort from single family zone to commercial. So it's a big NIMBY, well, it's not NIMBY right now, but it's just, that's the risk, that people feel like, the neighborhood's changing, when in fact it's bringing a lot of amazing value right to their doorstep. And so we're having to bring everybody on board. And interesting story, and then I'll hand it over to you, Ted. Someone got promoted within the county. We heard about their promotion, and as you kind of probably have experienced, they really wanted to make a name for themselves, and they changed their opinion about the project. And so this aspect of this kind of human dimension of what does it get someone to disagree and what does it get someone to agree, and how's everybody, I mean, so you might not physically be going there to the ranch to buy your groceries, but you may be able to say, hey, you know, I helped pass this and now I'm up for promotion. And that's what we're hoping. But I mean, those kinds of red flags they just pop up and you're like, oh, you know, hello, please come visit the site and we'll do a walkthrough with you and we'll talk about, you know, what you care about on the site. And eventually they became a supporter. So, I mean, it's a lot of people. It's just a lot of people involved.
I have maybe a slightly less people-filled experience of code. This is possibly because I grew up in DC to a family of lawyers, but I feel like a deep need to never be told I can't do something by the code. I am a little bit of a code nerd in that sense. I want to know every single rule so that I know how to find a way through. There almost always is some way to think of the problem differently. If you're clear, again, to that narrative question of what is important to you or what you're trying to achieve. I think the New York code, there's no one to call. But that's also the kind of plus a little bit, which is that there's this labyrinthine layering of all of these ways you can think of a problem, kind of. And so I feel like the code has the illusion of being often a limiting factor, but as in the case of like the last project I showed, there's nothing that says you can't do that, but it's not the way that people interpret the zoning code, right? So I think that there's an implication in a lot of code that it should cause a certain thing to happen, and I think if we are creative and thoughtful about why the code is written the way it is and what it's trying to protect or what we're trying to achieve instead, that there's many other ways often of thinking about those problems. It's maybe a little easier in New York where it's so messy than in a place where like you have to talk to the person and they have to agree or not, right? So, you know, it's one of the strange like hyper-local things about architecture, even though we imagine it's something that we can apply in many settings. It is like incredibly local in a legal sense, besides being just local in a construction sense and in a place sense. Yeah.
I mean, so one example, this isn't our project, but mass timber in New York City and is a people problem right now. So the EDC is doing, right? Yeah, so the EDC is doing this amazing mass timber studio effort, giving financing to design teams in order to help them get through the DOB with their mass timber projects, and then simultaneously the DOB is learning how to update their approach. So it's this massive educational process that is guaranteeing that these buildings are going to be passed by DOB, so it's a win-win. And then the biggest reason why the code doesn't change is because you have to teach so many people to change their ways. And this is that effort. It's amazing. I think it's so phenomenal. So hopefully this will unlock a lot of new kinds of projects in the city.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that too, it's like, you know, we've come across the situation where Landmarks has learned some of these things, like in terms of window upgrades and stuff like that, and they're willing to kind of change out things, but DOB doesn't, and it's kind of like the number of parties privy to saying yes or no seem infinite at times in New York, but in other places it's more a phone call away sometimes. And I also think, Ted, your sort of interest in code, one thing I really appreciated was your bathroom project, because that's also an interest in code. It's like the codes of how you use the bathroom, you know, the plan you showed at first versus what you created in the end is very much like rituals or types of codes, and I think that's one of the things that's really wonderful about that bathroom project as well.
I mean, I think that that's a good example too of like what we imagine the code tells you to do or not. Like there's nothing that tells you this thing has to be on the wall. And so when I showed this to the builder, of course, they're like, oh, this will never be approved. I was like, why? like, no, there's this kind of idea that code is about making things normal, but actually there's specific rules, right? And if you follow them, you can do it in a different way. So like that meets all the same requirements. But for example, no one had ever done that the bathroom has an island vent, which normally you do in an island for a kitchen, but no one had ever done, or he'd never done an island vent in a bathroom, but there's no reason you can't, right? So it's an example of like, tell me why you think you can't do it. Tell me why you think it's going to not be approved or whatever, and then we'll find the way that will meet those needs while at the same time not making the thing we're trying to do impossible. So I think that that's a great example of that, yeah.
And also, I think, one of the things that that project brings up is this notion of like the choreography of living, but just choreography in general, and how it relates to movement through space. And I think one of the things, this notion of choreography came up in both of your presentations and the way you wrote about your work. And I thought it was really interesting that you both use choreography, but to talk about slightly different things. And I think for you, Ted, it is a bit about ritual and the way spaces choreograph daily life. And I think, Lindsay, with some of your work, it was kind of a choreography of materials that spans from before a project even starts to way after it is completed. And I think that notion of how you both think about that term was really interesting to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think using that word, I think I mentioned in my application essay for the award that I had been doing a lot of talks, and the name of the talk is Choreography of Care. So that's the typical kind of lecture that I'll do. And it kicks off with this idea that choreography is more like the material that I'm thinking about and working with. And what are our limits? What's the beginning? What's the end? That's a huge question when you're thinking about sustainability as a mode of practice, even though that word is a little, we shouldn't probably use that word anymore, but you can kind of categorize that mode of practice as thinking about resources, thinking about people, qualitative metrics. And so choreography helped me, build a narrative for each project and and then challenge each project. There's a lot of times with our work where that might get lost and you're kind of just trying to get to the finish line. And then when you come out and you're thinking, okay, like what was this choreography story? And how did it impact people? And so one slide that I have typically shown in these longer presentations is the taking stock of the global voice that was Material Worlds. I mapped all of the people that were involved in contributing to this series of episodes, and it turned out it wasn't that global. and I missed like huge parts of the world. So when I go around and say, oh yeah, it's so super global, and this is the future of materials, it's a one version of that kind of a flow. But I think when you take stock and you look at what's like the map I did for Who Builds Your Architecture, who's coming from where and who's missing really. Once you map it out, like what's missing, and I think that kind of analysis I hope to keep doing on every project so that it can keep challenging the office to go deeper and understand more about that phrase of choreography. What can we do better next time?
I think of choreography as being a kind of foil for program, because I think one thing that's very interesting to me about domestic spaces is just how much time we spend in them. So there's a way that architecture is not about a singular experience, but it's about all the ways that we don't use it in the same way, right? And for me, one of the kind of like annoying and frustrating conversations is with being told like, where am I going to put the bedside table, or yeah, it's like, where do I put the TV? All these things, because it kind of imagines that spaces only work if they are exactly the same as where you already live, or a place you've already been. And I think one of the exciting things for me about making domestic spaces is that they don't have to do that, or that they can offer another opportunity of living. So like maybe you don't have to watch TV in bed. Like maybe you can do that somewhere else, right? And that doesn't always work out necessarily, but I like the idea that you might learn something about what architecture can do for you or what opportunities it makes by it being interfering with the way that you expected to live, let's say. So I'm not trying to make people's lives difficult, though I do not have a TV, and therefore I'm not a good person to ask about that. But I think that it's what makes architecture in a domestic setting like have opportunity or potential.
Well said. I do think that sort of, yeah, that seems like a continuation of that code sort of discussion that we were having, and just this notion of rituals and how you manipulate them or how you rethink them. I also, one of the other things that I think comes up a lot in your work, Lindsay, and I think I saw kind of a different way that you talked about it in your Cape Cod house too, is just the relationship between the natural world and the built structure that you place within it. And I love the anecdote you gave about the black pine and how it was like good at parties. And I think, it seems like a lot of your projects revolve around that sort of connection between the two. And, there is this sense that a lot of the projects you shared are focusing on that threshold between the two, and I'm curious to hear you think about what happens on the inside of the building versus the outside, because a lot of it seemed to happen on the outside, and then also with your house in Greenport, was it? That entire building kind of became the threshold between two sort of zones, and I thought that was an interesting way to think about the object in the landscape. Yeah.
It's good advice. I need to add more interior shots to the projects. Yeah, I think it is something that comes up a lot, and it's a challenge. I think that telling the story of the material being harvested and flowing into the beams, and the beams are wood, and then someday they'll be dismantled. It's one way to think about the connection to nature. But really, yeah, what do you feel like when you go there? And do you feel that connection when you're there? It's another level. It's another challenge. I can say a couple of anecdotal, things that come to mind. For example, when you're at Public Records in the summer, it's hot. It's hot inside. It's hot in that nursery. If they don't remember to open the vents at the top and the heat isn't flowing out, it can feel really hot. So maybe you connect to nature in that way. I remember an opening day, and they had just not yet opened the vents at the peak where the heat's supposed to be gathered, and it felt like, wow, it's really working. It's really collecting this heat. No, I think it's that kind of multi-sensory experience is one that I would like to explore more. How do you convey all the five senses when you're in a project? Another key space that we're thinking about with one of the barns at Rancho Almosomos is a space that's a celebration of the rain. And this is where the barn question comes into play. Is a barn a place where you celebrate rain? Barn is supposed to be functional and just, all you do is shovel there. Well, with biodynamic farming, there's such a spiritual element with the farming processes. There's rituals, there are lunar cycles, and this is a part of the desert that rarely receives rain. And so understanding when the rain comes, we better be ready to collect all of it and to celebrate the hell out of it. And so that space has been our primary focus. Make sure that space is so good. And so it's unbuilt, so you just have to imagine it right now. We are enjoying it. Yeah, but you can, yeah, I'm bringing you there. So those are two examples. I think it is this kind of, maybe to just brainstorm with you all here, and an inspiration from creating the film for this exhibition, taking, film, showing more film as part of these kinds of lectures would be a way to get into that headspace.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think what the rain brings up is that like nature isn't one thing. Like it doesn't act in one way, and it's also different in every place. So I think probably all the projects, or I mean, the two house projects I showed, each are pretty explicitly about a relationship to nature, but I think in pretty different ways. And I think one role that's interesting about architecture to me is that it lets you occupy different positions, right? So it lets you either take a certain elevation, or it lets you frame a certain view, or it gives you a certain sequence of spaces, let's say. So I think for me, those are the kind of like mediators to thinking about how architecture and nature, or let's say the outside, to be more generic about it, how those things interact. I think a kind of perversity of that threshold in many projects, of course, is that you have to often get rid of a lot to make a house, right? I mean, I loved your example of the effort it took to only take down 3 trees. For example, the site in Greenport, I mean, it's hard to say that we took down trees. I mean, we did take some down, but it's the kind of site where there was like a lot of weedy things that are not something you can keep in a certain way, right? So or you can, but not in a way that is sustainable as a place to live, right? So I think very often this idea of what the nature is that the architecture is in response to kind of discounts the fact that there's a lot of work to construct the nature around a house anyway too. So I think that that's something that is always kind of present in these contemporary versions of the modernist question of where does the outside come in, because there's a lot of work to kind of build both of those things. One project I didn't include here was it's a deck actually that's like a diving board. It's like a 40-foot long deck, but it's only 8 feet wide, that like sticks out from the side of a house. And it's a little bit that same question of like, maybe there's a way to experience the land just from a different perspective. And it's not so much about like that idea of the threshold being brought in or out, but more where can I be that lets me see something that otherwise I didn't see before.
I don't know if we're got plenty of time. Fantastic. Yeah, I think that question of elevation and also like section in projects such as yours are really interesting ones, because it does kind of change. I like the example in the Cape Cod house where it was a 1-story house and you were kind of tasked with how do you stitch something together, and that I thought it was a really kind of wonderful way in which you created new vantage points, but also you started questioning these notions of the vernacular, what is normal for a Cape Cod house, how does it deal with its site, and while I was preparing for this, I also learned about your thesis at the GSD, which was about like strangeness in vernacular forms, which just resonated so much with that project. And it seemed to me like that is a project in your work, and a sort of through line, and you know, I'm interested in how you kind of present that project in its various forms, but also with different types of communities, clients that you have started to work with, to bring them on board. Strangeness is wonderful, but not everyone thinks so.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, let's see. you heard me mention sort of some geometric terms in a few moments about like parallelity or alignment or coincidence of these things. I think geometry seems like it's about making something more knowable and more controllable, which is the kind of like Enlightenment history of that. It's supposed to bring precision and clarity, but it also does lots of other things too. And it's those other things that I'm also quite interested in, which is the way that a certain relationship like symmetry can become a kind of foil, like an alternate kind of gravity that becomes something that the project has to contend with. And I don't think these are very niche things. They're everywhere, basically. If you think of like Chartres Cathedral, which has 2 towers which are different heights, it's impossible to not see the symmetry in the building, right? So the fact that it can tolerate that difference is that pull or that interference that some of these geometric properties present. So I think in the case of like the Cape Cod house, the idea of like stitching this thing into the roof using all of these alignments, basically, was not just like a fetish of mine. It's specifically meeting a kind of question of the client, which is like, how do we make this not look like it's foreign to the house, while at the same time knowing I was certainly not going to make like a vernacular shed roof. Like that wasn't going to be, I wasn't the right person for that job, right? So it was a way of quite literally addressing that question of how to contend with an architectural problem, but also like a construction problem and all these other things. Like that was a project that was governed not by dimensions, but really by these alignments or these points. And a lot of these rooms are different sizes than we originally thought, just because of where they were able to find those right alignments. Maybe one other example in the bathroom is the kind of game of the center being 3-sided while the room is 4-sided. It allows there to be an impossible fit of those spaces. So there's a way, it's a way of kind of allowing for a continuity of all of those exterior spaces that doesn't become a kind of tiny hallway, right? And that was something immediately the client was on board with. So I really don't think that they're actually that foreign to some of those kind of like mundane concerns of a client, but it has to be in service of other things. It's not just for itself, I guess. But I think we all find these devices that help us like solve problems and help us like navigate making design decisions that isn't just about taste.
Lindsay, I was wondering, in your experience, there are these elements that are crucial to your research and then find their way into your projects themselves. And I can only imagine that, they're extremely hard to hold on to. I mean, you kind of joked at the beginning that somebody started to put a steel column in one of your buildings, and like, I'm very much curious how you hold on to that when, I mean, in my personal experience as a young practitioner, those are really hard things to see through to the end, and this notion, I know the word is not accurate, but like this notion of sustainability is so multivalent, and so you kind of like have to, tie your horse to one thing many times, and you have to kind of understand how to prioritize all these multiple ways in which you can approach that topic. And I'm curious to hear, in the more client-driven work, how you have dealt with that. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of great opportunities out there to think through sustainability in different ways. I'm always challenged by my partner who does this professionally, does carbon calculation. Every time I use the word sustainability, he's like, it's not what you're doing. And so there are folks out there that are understanding deeply how to measure this stuff. And I am admittedly not doing that. Like, I'm not going to come and tell you how many tons of carbon are in the fibers. I used to do that. In the book, there's a lot of calculation about carbon. It just is, the book was actually the pivot point for me in that way. There's a series of drawings in the book called Equivalence, where I created drawings that showed how much time you have to spend in a sweater in the summer equivalent to the carbon that's in like one panel instead of changing your thermostat. Because it's just like, it's so relative to what you're doing. So 10 tons of carbon, does anyone know like how much that is? No, right? Is it a little? Is it a lot? Is it relative to a long period of time? I mean, it's just such an abstract thing. So it's better left to folks who are experts in that. I'm much more interested in going maybe back to our roots to understand like water and sun, and understanding how buildings are oriented to those sources of energy and can just simply do that well and not mess that up, and so that they can last. And so the client that we have out in Arizona, that's tied into the way that they move fertilizer. For fertilizer for biodynamic farming is all like from the site. So it's like cow horns and manure, and so that movement of material and energy across the site has to go through these buildings. The water has to be captured by the buildings. The sun has to be shaded at certain times of year, and heat is moving passively. So we're trying to make the least amount of conditioned space. I also, want to think of a word someday. I'm setting goals with you guys. Someday, I'll come back here and give a lecture about how to measure doing less. Because it's really tough to say, hey, here's the project I didn't do. Here's the thing that was big and now it's small. And that's more like what I'm thinking about. Trying to make just the amount of energy a lot less. But I think you can do that in a lot of kinds of forms, and I think our clients are, maybe one of the struggles or interesting things that I want to grow in our practice is the use of the word barn, for example, that we talked about. It creates such a strong image in a client's mind that it's actually really tough to walk that back or change that or alter it or even introduce an asymmetrical section. So it's like New England, like red barn. And so the fact that this isn't a New England red barn is quite the achievement. No, I'm joking. But that use of language and anyway, how it connects to form is something that I'm interested in. And of course, like understanding the flows on the site. I don't know. Sustainability, it's a kind of big challenge for the practice to show something at the end of the day. Like, here's what we're pointing to. Here's what we mean by sustainability. I think we live in a time where, because that's not defined, we're kind of getting a pass. I could say a lot of stuff, and I think the book is probably the most specific about this mode of operation. And then hearing also from everyone in the material world's episodes, what does it mean to be working with materials today? It's a really serious, series of talks. But then in the projects, there's so many parameters. And I think one of the things that we maybe don't talk enough about is the cost, operational cost, lifetime cost, capital expense. And I think this is really interesting when you think about sustainability or passive heating and cooling, communicating the value not only like formally with passive energy, which is absolutely a formal challenge, but the savings on the client side with the amount of infrastructure that they're moving to the site. In this case, it's a rural site, so they're trucking out. They would have to truck out like massive equipment to kind of condition the space they originally wanted to. And now they're like saving money, and we're dealing with those kinds of reductions. So it's like really boring. Like some of these achievements, I feel like we should have champagne in the office for every time we reduce like the energy use on the site. I don't know. And another thought that comes to mind is just measuring when you're thinking about lifetime costs. Recently, we had a conversation with one of the buildings on the site that's being VE'd for either a metal roof or an asphalt shingle roof. So which one's more sustainable? And so it has everything to do with, like, of course, like where it's made and how much energy goes into it, but how long it lasts and how much change has to be, how much labor is going into it. So a lot of times we're trying to understand exactly what has to change over the lifetime of the material in order for it to make the money back. And so we got down into the nitty-gritty of corrugated roof option, where really the only thing that has to change is the screws. So we're like, can you just take the sheets off and just change the screws? And like, yes, that's what we'll do every 15 years instead of replace the whole roof. So just those things, how do I make that a pretty slide is one of my challenges, but we'll get there. We'll get there. We got it, team.
Can I add one thing to that? I mean, I really liked your comment about the how do we build less. It's one of the things that is not in the code at all. So like the whole structure of the energy code is technology driven. It's not architecturally driven. So something like having a whole staircase outside, like there's no incentive for doing that, even though it's like all that area that would have been conditioned, right? So I think there are lots of architectural strategies that achieve the things that we're supposedly after with all of these various codes, including for energy and cost, but that are not incentivized at all.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when you can kind of incentivize some of those things to the client, I think in, you know, the essay I read that you wrote about the zoning, like being able to say, you could build a little bit more conditioned space if you can, you know, keep the stair outside or something like this. And so even if at the end of the day, in that example, you're building more at the end of the day, but it starts to create a culture of like appreciating stairs that are only half conditioned, you know? And so it starts to become part of that conversation. And I think we have to kind of wrap up now, but I just wanted to say with both of your work, it's really an inspiration and you know, when I received this prize, we had people from a different generation speaking with us, and it's really kind of wonderful to be able to speak to people who are kind of dealing with the exact same problems that we are in our studio, and thank you for sharing all your work, your wonderful work. Thanks.